Assalamu alaikum everyone, Adnan Rashid here at Edmonton Airport. I'm heading to Toronto. I just want to request that every single one of you must subscribe to Life Haq podcast YouTube channel. A lot of amazing content is going to come up. A series on Ottomans is already there. My podcast, which I did with the brothers from Life Haq, is going to come up very soon. So watch this space and subscribe. Do not miss this opportunity to be exposed to amazing content on Islamic intellectual history and the history of Islamic dynasties and all of that. So Life Haq is your channel. Subscribe. Assalamu alaikum.
No, I'm not worried at all. I rely on God, Allah.
Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome everyone to another episode of the Life Haq podcast. Today we have a very special guest with us and also an assistant guest as well, alhamdulillah. So we have with us today Sheikh Adnan Rashid, which, you know, if you know how to use YouTube, then you're very familiar with the Sheikh. Especially, I got so much feedback about his, lessons on history and, how he goes into bringing all these Islamic characters and events to life that we had to have Sheikh Adnan on the podcast. And then we also have with us brother Abu Ayyub as well. And actually, prior to this podcast, the conversations alone could have filmed another podcast. So we just naturally, organically went into conversation head first. So everything you're going to see is really organic because it's just a continuation of, three brothers getting together and discussing Islam, Islamic history, and just being passionate about it and just going with the flow. So this podcast, we have some goals and objectives, but what you're seeing is really untapped, raw passion for Islam and Islamic history. And we have a special guest prop with us here today. And with this device, it's usually used, Sheikh, right, to look forward,
yes,
correct?
That's
and
right.
to go see something that's forward or something in the future that you're going to encounter. But you can't really do that unless you know where you came from in your history.
Exactly.
Correct?
Yes.
What do you think? Is it important for us to know our Islamic history, where we came from, and what has your personal journey been in that discovery process?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I believe history is absolutely crucial to be able to see the future in a better light. Okay. Otherwise, you're blind. If you don't have history, if you don't know your history, and if you don't know your history, you're completely blind to it. You're ignorant. And if you are ignorant, then you don't have anything to look up to, right? What we call the precedent, okay? The Quran sets a precedent of the stories of the prophets. Allah tells us, us being Muslims, we have the Quran as our guide, okay? It's the word of Allah. Allah is the one who guides us through His word. And when we read the word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we see patterns, we see messages, we see glimpses into the past, right? And the reason why Allah uses the past is to teach us how to better predict the future and save yourselves from pitfalls. Okay, pitfalls that people have already gone through or fallen into in the past. So Allah tells us, "A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Siru fil ard, fanzuru kayfa kana aqibatul mukaththibin." Go in the land and see what happened to those who came before you, those who denied Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They were very powerful, they were very intelligent, they were very educated, they had so much power that they raised monuments like the pyramids, let's say, right? People are still amazed to this day, how did they even build this, right?
Yes.
When you look at Petra, when you go to a place like Petra in Jordan, okay, you see mountains, valleys upon valleys carved with bare hands. Why do I say bare hands? Because they didn't have the drills we have today, right? You must have seen this guy, one of the people who work, on roads. They have these powerful drills. Sometimes they're trying to break the roads, and they have these very powerful drills that crack the road. They didn't have any of that. And Allah gives us specific examples of these people. Look at these people. They achieved all of this, right? But those achievements didn't do anything for them.
Yes.
Right? They died unsuccessful because they took pride in those achievements, and that pride didn't really save them. Right? It didn't make them happier. It didn't make them more successful. It didn't make them more content. Right? Because they kept going. The pharaohs they weren't stopping. Okay, one after another, each and every single pharaoh was building his own legacy by carving stones, resurrecting statues, building temples, building palaces or pyramids, eventually as tombs. Okay, they weren't stopping. They lacked satisfaction for some reason.
Why have we severed that connection of those lessons of history? Why have we severed that? Because today, it's the exact opposite. We look and we are enamored by people who are building bigger and better things when there are, as you've mentioned, there are countless examples. And even if we look at, for example, a story from the Seerah where Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, he told the Sahaba when they had stopped in the dwellings of, Ad Thamud, don't go there unless you're going to go cry and reflect.
Yes.
You know what I mean? So why have we severed that connection of those lessons? Because it's almost like countless examples. So you're given like countless examples of historical lessons, especially through an Islamic lens. So we derive what are those actual lessons, and we are making those same mistakes today. Because look at even some of our own countries. They sometimes say, "Oh, look at our country is advanced if it has the tallest building in the world."
Yeah.
Our countries are advanced if we have the most satellites put up into space.
Absolutely.
You know what I mean?
This is where the problem is. People equate success, happiness with technological advancement or building of machines or getting sophisticated in creating things like all these gadgets we use on daily basis. People think this is success. As Muslims, do we have that same perspective? We don't. We do not. Okay, these are important things, no doubt. These are, we call them blessings of Allah that come as a result of progress made spiritually. In Islam, spiritual progress takes precedence over material progress. So when people start to judge the civilization of Islam by using arguments like, oh, we were the most advanced people in the world. We had the best scientists. We had Ar-Razi, we had Ibn al-Haytham, we had Abu al-Qasim al-Dhahrawi, we had, let's say, Ibn Nafis, okay? We have Ibn Rushd, the philosopher. We had all these people, and therefore we had a very successful civilization because we were materialistically or materially rich, okay? We produced these observatories, we produced these scholars, we produced these labs where people experimented. We had universities, we had hospitals, we had paved roads, we had street lights in Cordoba in the 10th century, and I can go on and on and on and on talk about these things. Okay, from Spain to China, the Muslim civilization stretched from Al-Andalus all the way to China. So people think success meant having all these things. No, absolutely not, because other civilizations also had this.
Yes.
Okay, the Romans had it. The Greeks had it. Look at the Greek monuments, Acropolis. If you go to Athens, you see the carving of these statues and all these. So these are mind-blowing things, right? So Muslims are not unique in that sense. Of course, they took it to a very different magnitude, no doubt. Muslim expansion, Muslim advancement, the Muslim civilization reached a level of success, materialistically speaking, like never before. No other civilization had achieved that. Even the Romans and the Greeks put together. Because the Muslims brought all this knowledge together in one place, or in few places, let's say Baghdad, Damascus, Kairouan, and even in Central Asia. And then later on in Spain, Islamic Spain, Muslims experimented, they produced books there. They accumulated large libraries, okay? In fact, one of the caliphs in Spain, Hakam II, in the 10th century, he had the largest library in human history.
Subhanallah.
Okay, when I say in human history, I'm saying that with confidence, right? He had 400,000 volumes handwritten. Okay, there were no printing presses at the time. Hakam II was so fond of books that he had agents working for him on full-time basis, collecting books for him from global libraries. He was in Spain, in Cordoba, ruling from Cordoba, okay? And he had over 400,000 books. 40 volumes alone documented the catalog.
So
think about that, right? So
does this also reflect, as you're speaking, I almost feel, isn't this almost like an evidence for the truth that Islam comes with? Because if we look at the Sahaba, when they brought Islam to people, they didn't say, look at our great, huge, massive civilization and you can be like us materially if you become Muslim. You know what I mean? And the same thing today, as Muslims live in minority, it's like, are people becoming Muslim in such huge numbers in Western countries because they say, oh, your countries are so advanced civilization-wise? They're saying no, because of the message that you're bringing.
It is not the end.
Yes.
Okay. Material progress, material success, technology, advancement in creating towns, let's say, or town planning, or building roads and hospitals. These things are important. These are important outcomes of any successful civilization. But in Islam, what comes before this success is the spiritual development of humans, character building.
Yes.
Making better humans, right? You had Romans, let's say, very powerful, but were they good human beings? There were Greeks, very powerful, very intelligent, highly learned. They carved monuments, but were they moral characters? These are very important questions. We had Mongols, immensely powerful, okay, very powerful. They carved a larger empire than the Muslims had because they beat the Muslims in terms of land acquisition, right? But were they moral human beings? So where does Islam come into this? Islam claims superiority based upon moral teachings, moral values. So with Islam came upright, moral human beings who gave the world this civilization we just discussed. So when you have libraries, when you have hospitals, paved roads, street lights, successful societies functioning in an organized fashion, all of this, if it accompanies moral human beings, or moral human beings are running all this, then it is a truly successful civilization. This is a point Iqbal very eloquently highlighted in his poetry. He said, "Juda ho deen siyasat se, to reh jati hai changezi," in the Urdu language, and I will translate. Basically, it means that when you separate deen, your moral values, your ethical values, from your politics, then what remains is Genghis Khan. Okay, so Genghis Khan did a lot of politics. He conquered lands. He conquered territories. His children did. They conquered China, parts of China. They conquered parts of Central Asia. They went as far as Russia, even as far as Poland. They were invading Lahore. In the subcontinent, Indian subcontinent. They went very far, but they were brutal. They killed a lot of people. They killed animals, humans. They cut trees. They destroyed civilizations, right? So they were politically successful. I use the word successful in inverted commas because to some people that's expansion on a grand scale, and then what came from it, the city of Karakoram, the capital. But were they moral people, the Mongols, right? Because they had no moral values backing their military expansion, they themselves got conquered by Islam. So this is a phenomenon in our history where Mongols came conquering the lands of Islam from northern China all the way up to Syria, where they were checked by the Mamelukes of Egypt, right? And in India they were stopped by the Delhi Sultanate sultans, who fought them for over a century to keep them away from India. And this is another side point I would like to mention, that Indians don't know the favors Muslim sultans have done to the subcontinent, right? If the Muslim sultans didn't stand in the way of the Mongols, India would have been wiped out completely. Okay,
subhanallah.
like what happened in Persia,
Yes.
what happened in Central Asia, what happened in land as far as Syria, right? Mongols went conquering, massacring, killing, basically decimating anything that came there. Cities that were destroyed during the Mongol invasions never came back up. Okay, there were many cities that were destroyed forever. So the point I'm making is all of this military expansion and success, like the Romans did, like the British Empire did later on, like what the Western civilization is doing today, in many ways through financial institutions, right? Unfair policies imposed upon the world. All of this is going to fail, like it did in the past, because there are no moral values behind this, right? There is no greater purpose behind all of this. With Islam, it was different. The reason why Muslims became successful wasn't because they were some great thinkers or great general. They were successful because of the values they brought with them. Okay, people were happier under them, even though people didn't accept Islam. They became happier. The Jewish people, they lived under the protection of Islam for over 1,000 years, and they created the golden age. Likewise, Christians who were living within the domain of Islam, they were very successful. They were flourishing in places like Spain, even in the Middle East. The largest or the oldest, the oldest Christian civilization or Christian populations in the world were living in the Muslim lands. To this day, the oldest Christian community in the world is in Egypt. One of the oldest, I would say, the Coptic Christians. They're still there. Okay, so although there have been mass conversions within the Coptic community as well. So the bottom line is, success doesn't necessarily mean having more advanced technology and all that, having top of the range rockets and space machines and astronauts working in an institution like NASA.
Could we say the current paradigm that people buy into is that to be successful materially, you do it in spite of a moral foundation, whereas the Islamic approach is to be successful materially is a result of morality, Islam, Iman and Ihsan.
Yeah, being happier as a person.
Because, for example, you mentioned you have, say, great infrastructure, nice roads, facilities, hospitals, and so forth. So a person who comes at it from an amoral perspective, like, okay, we want to achieve this for our society because that's going to make my citizens happy, that's going to, improve my own standing, whatever, and it's to show off to the world, look how bright and powerful and everything that we are. So this is, in spite of, and if you have to do amoral things, say in other countries, to garnish the resources and to extract the resources to make that happen, you're going to do it. Whereas from Islam, it's a result of our Islam, our Iman and Ihsan. Because if I'm a ruler and I say, listen, Islam tells me to do things with ihsan. I can't have, as Umar bin al-Khattab used to think about, is there some donkey, getting tripped up in a road that because of me? I need to pave this because this is an amana.
Yes.
So it's like I'm doing these material things, providing hospitals, providing clothing, providing things as a result of my morality.
Absolutely.
Not in spite of my morality.
100%. So look, the outcome of what we call the Western Enlightenment period, okay, in the 18th century. Why is it called the Enlightenment? Basically, the Enlightenment from the Christian past, okay? The Christian past in Western history was seen as a period of darkness by these Enlightenment philosophers. So because they freed themselves from that past and they could see a better future by speculating as humans or postulating a better future, okay, through their own philosophies, they called it the Enlightenment, right? The Enlightenment century or the Enlightenment period, okay? Despite the fact that all these atrocities are still going on, slave trade reached its peak in the 18th century, witches were being burnt alive in Europe as we are going through this Enlightenment, right? But one of the outcomes was hedonism.
Yes.
Okay, pursuit of pleasure. How is the question? pursuit of pleasure by following material desires, right? Making yourself materialistically powerful, right? That's how you attain pleasure. In Islam, it is very different. It is pursuit of happiness by becoming a moral person, okay, through worshipping Allah. So in Islam, the focus is Allah. Why? Because Allah wants us to be moral people. And when we become moral people, by extension, as a consequence, we will become happier.
Yes.
Like the Quran states. And that happiness definitely constitutes material advancement. Okay? Allah doesn't want us to be blind to paved roads, properly functioning hospitals and universities.
It's like, Sheikh, for example, like if in your programming, it's like, I'm going to work out regularly, I'm going to eat well or whatever, a natural consequence of that is you're going to be more resistant to disease.
Yes.
Whereas if you're like, I just want to avoid disease, then maybe you're going to be heavily reliant on medications and just treating it every single time. But what you're saying is an Islamic approach, a natural consequence of that is you will have various degrees of material success, but that's a natural consequence of, and it's not an absolute criteria of what true success is.
Yes, absolutely. And how do we know that? We know that historically, that in the Muslim history, we didn't have a utopia, we didn't have perfection, because humans are working on this system. Like, humans make mistakes. Humans are prone to error. They are susceptible to desires, influences from elsewhere, from other civilizations or other systems, right? So humans are very imperfect by nature, right? So when humans are trying to work out or work with a perfect system, they will definitely make mistakes. But because the system is so powerful, it will definitely produce some good results, right? So this is why in Islamic history we have such so few examples of fewer examples of mass murder, massacres or genocides, right? While on the other hand, when you look at other human histories or histories of other human groups or other civilizations, you see that happening across the board, right?
Very recently,
even to this day, okay? And this is an outcome of depression. I believe a happy person cannot commit a genocide. A person who is content within his soul, or he has a content soul, will not commit atrocities like that. So even though in their pursuit of happiness, or pursuit of pleasure rather, hedonism, when these civilizations or these people achieved their pleasure by attaining power and strength, they ended up committing atrocities. Okay, so when hedonism became dominant as a philosophy in the Western world, what came about was colonialism. And with colonialism came suppression, oppression, tyranny against the natives of every single land that was colonized. Okay, so you have Australia, you have India, you have South America, North America, you have all over the world wherever colonial powers went. You know what they did, right? I mean, that's another podcast.
Yes.
We can discuss that at another point. So the point I'm making is, this happened because the philosophy driving their systems and their advancement wasn't a moral philosophy. Okay? On the other hand, despite all the imperfections of the Muslim civilization, we didn't have these issues. We didn't have these problems. We didn't commit genocides against the Jewish people or the Christian people. Of course, in wars, when people rebel or when wars kick off, atrocities do take place. But after there is peace, how people flourish, how people feel living with the civilization is very important, right? It's very important.
You know what I gather from what you've just mentioned is that the magnificence of Islamic history seems to be nestled within not just pragmatics of learning lessons to apply them for technological development, innovation, products and so on and so forth. Yes, you can drive those things, but what you were getting at is that there is a psycho-spiritual treasure in Islamic history.
Absolutely.
If we can tap into that, perhaps we can not just be a better ummah pragmatically, but we will be a happier ummah, a more fulfilled ummah, a ummah that can be more connected to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, know its purpose. Because as you just described, if you pursue technology, your career, studies, without that connection that spiritual, psycho-spiritual connection to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then you are actually building your own shackles.
Your own destruction.
You're
Yes.
building your own prison, and you're putting yourself in that prison.
Exactly.
And what you just described in terms of the Mongols, that's what they did. They built a magnificent prison for them to live in and die in and be destroyed in.
Yes, right.
And it seems that this is our modern life. We're going through the process of going to school for no reason. Just, okay, you go to school because you need a degree. Okay, you get a degree because you need a job. You need a job because you need to get married. You need to get married because you need to have kids. You need to have kids so then you have somebody who can take care of you
So what happens
before
to
you
the
die.
human being in all of this? What happens to the tranquility of the heart? Okay, where does that go? This is why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala addresses this point in a very powerful verse in the Quran. A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Ala bi dhikrillah tatma'innul qulub. Ala bi dhikrillah tatma'innul qulub. Is it not in the remembrance of Allah hearts find tranquility? So hearts can only become tranquil when they remember Allah, when they are Allah conscious. Allah is on their minds all the time, and because Allah is on the mind, whatever progress they make will be a moral progress. Okay, because Allah is the one who is commanding us to be merciful, to be compassionate, to be just, to be truthful, to be upright, to be fair with people. Don't brutalize people. Don't treat them unfairly, even if you dislike them. The Quran says in chapter 4. Verse 135 and chapter 5 verse 8, two verses in the Quran that give us this concept of justice. Okay, and this is something I want to talk about as well, that Islamically speaking, our civilization is built of four events. I call them the golden chain of events. Okay, it's a chain of events that occurred throughout the Muslim history. It may be a simplistic view of our history, but it is a correct one in my opinion. Okay, this basically chain has four locks, right? The first lock or the first event in our history is the revelation of the Quran, or the emergence of the Quran, let's say, in the 7th century, right? That emergence of the Quran from the 7th century gave rise to what we call the Islamic concept of justice. Okay, from that Islamic concept of justice came progress. Okay, so because you are a moral people, you are a just people, you are a fair people, people ruled by your system are happier, and because of that happiness they made progress. There is no progress without peace. Okay, that never happens in human history.
Yes,
you will never make progress without peace, and peace depends on justice. So if there's no justice, there will never be peace, right? So from justice comes peace, and from peace comes progress. So these are four events: the revelation of the Quran, speaking as a Muslim, right? Then justice that came from the Quran, or the teachings of the Quran. Then came peace from that justice, what we call aman or aman, okay? And then came progress. So we didn't jump from the Quran all the way to progress. Okay, well, I can't say that the street lights in Cordoba basically are found in the Quran. Allah does not command us to go and build street lights and build universities and libraries of a grand scale in Cordoba, right? Allah didn't tell us that, in the Quran. What Allah did was He gave us parameters. He gave us the map. Okay, He gave us the instructions to achieve that. Okay, that was a natural outcome of what the Muslims had achieved before that outcome, and before that outcome comes peace that was facilitated by the justice Muslims offered to the world, and that justice came directly from the Quran. So this is the golden chain of events. Okay, and of course there's no perfection. There are periods of upheavals, there are periods of turmoil, there were wars, but generally speaking, for over 1,000 years, Muslims created a very vibrant, a very powerful civilization that facilitated peace and justice and progress for a lot of people.
and we have the roadmap, right? Because we have the Sunnah of Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and we saw how he won over the hearts not with brutality and authority, exercising authority, but think about his greatest opponents during the time of our Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, how he dealt with them and what was the consequence. And then we were talking about the Mongol Empire.
Yeah.
How do they deal with their enemies? And how did they deal with opposition?
They didn't believe in mercy.
Exactly.
They didn't believe
and
in
what was the
compassion.
consequence? Yes, they had a material gain for a certain period of time.
Yeah.
But if we look at the effect today, do people say we want to follow the life and the path and the example and the history of the Mongols? But this day, people look at the life of Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, and he turned hearts, number one, enemies towards
Each other.
loving him.
Yeah.
Then and today, people who hated Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, when they read his life, they become Muslim.
Absolutely. And even those staunchest of enemies, Aus and Khazraj,
Yes.
two tribes in Medina, they were loggerheads against each other. You know, they recently fought a war called Bu'ath, the famous war or battle of Bu'ath, where many people were killed from both sides, and they were inhabitants of the same vicinity. They went to the Prophet to arbitrate between them, and when the Prophet came to Medina, these very staunch enemies became the strongest of friends. You know, their hearts were so united that together they protected the Prophet ﷺ. You know, they joined some people tried to cause that rift between them again after they became Muslim, but they were unsuccessful because of the love and the compassion the Prophet ﷺ had instilled within their minds. Okay, they became different people. They were not thinking with their passions anymore, like tribal passions or passions driven by tribalism, right? They were thinking more about Allah now. They were thinking of a bigger purpose in life. Okay, so the Prophet ﷺ, he made these enemies into friends, into brothers rather. They became brothers. People from Aus and Khazraj, they became brothers. They stood shoulder by shoulder or shoulder to shoulder to protect the Prophet ﷺ in many battles. In fact, they gave their lives protecting the Prophet ﷺ. The Battle of Uhud is an example when the Prophet was attacked by his own people. His own people, the Qurayshis, attacked him, and they're trying to kill him. They're trying to destroy the Prophet ﷺ. And who is standing in the way? Who is shielding the Prophet ﷺ? The Ansar. The Ansar. Who are the Ansar? A collection of Aus and Khazraj. People from Aus and Khazraj. Standing shoulder to shoulder as a shield in front of the Prophet ﷺ in the Battle of Uhud. 7 Sahaba. When the Prophet ﷺ was cornered, after Jabal Ramat was basically abandoned by those archers appointed by those who know the history, they know exactly what I'm talking about. The Prophet had appointed 50 archers on a small hill to protect the back of the Muslims in this battle. And when the first phase of the battle was won, these 40 archers, out of 40 archers, they left the spot and they came to collect the booty of war, right? And only 10 remained, and taking advantage of that, Khalid bin Walid came around, radiallahu anh, who became a Muslim later on. He came around and he attacked the Muslims from behind, and the fortunes were turned. And the Prophet's own life was threatened. He himself was attacked. The Qurayshis had realized that the Prophet is in this place, so they attacked that spot. And there were 9 companions with the Prophet ﷺ at the time. 7 of them gave their lives protecting the Prophet, and 2 remained alive, having been severely injured. Those 7 who gave their lives were all Ansar, and those 2 who remained alive were from the Muhajirin. They were also Qurayshi. Okay, one of them was Ubaydullah, Talha bin Ubaydullah, and the other one was Sa'ad bin Abi Waqqas. 7 companions of the Prophet who died protecting him, right? Gave their lives but didn't allow the Prophet ﷺ to be touched, although he was injured later on. All of them were Ansar. Hence the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, Ayatul Iman, Hubbul Ansar, Ayatul Nifaq, Bughdul Ansar.
Yeah.
Yes.
The sign of Iman is to love the Ansar, and the sign of hypocrisy is to hate them. Why? Because they played such a good... And the reason why I'm telling you this story is, look how Islam transformed these people. From being staunch enemies to each other, now they are united in one cause.
So what you're saying is that it seems that the transformation that they experienced through the deen, historically speaking, is, something that just opened up their hearts and their minds to the true reality.
Yes.
And that is that if we don't have the guidance of Islam with us, what we end up doing is being a slave to everything that we create and to our own selves.
Exactly.
But if we have Islam and we have the deen, and we can even learn from our Islamic history to see how this was done by the Sahaba and by our righteous luminaries throughout history, then it can emancipate us.
Yes.
And actually, truly, by being in the most honored state, the most honored achievement you can get is to be a slave of the one who created everything that we know in reality.
That's right.
And everything that we don't know. But beyond that, it seems that this actually gives you true mastery over your own self and anything that you create, anything that these products that we have around us. Like, we have an iPhone with us, but most people, they don't possess the iPhone. The iPhone possesses them.
That's right.
And it seems that, subhanAllah, by unlocking this connection to Islamic history, which can give us a more closer, meaningful connection to our deen, it seems that this is a way for us to be emancipated from this cycle of domination that's self-inflicted from the dunya, that we invite.
Or being mesmerized or being affected by influences, foreign influences, that themselves are not very successful when we look at the grand scheme of things, right?
But the beautiful thing is that we're not isolating ourselves from the tools.
Absolutely.
We're learning to not allow the tools to be our masters.
Exactly.
We are the masters over these tools.
That's right.
And Islam kind of keeps us from falling into that trap.
That's right.
And so I almost wonder if Ustadh Adnan, if you were, a fisherman, okay, and you have this shop and a big, huge lake is behind you, and we come to visit you, and that lake happens to be the history of Islam, okay, and we're going to go fishing. So it seems that we've been just catching the same fish every time, where we're just looking at, okay, what did Islamic history tell us about, inventions and things like that? What are the fish that we haven't caught yet as a Muslim ummah? What are we missing?
Absolutely amazing. That's a very good question and an important question. I think our wisdom, our literature, okay, our texts on morality, for example, akhlaq, okay, was a specific genre within the civilization of Islam. There were books written by scholars of Islam on manners, how to conduct yourselves, right? Allah tells us in the Quran, إِنَّكَ لَعَلَى خُلُقٍ عَظِيمٍ. The Prophet ﷺ was sent upon the best of manners. What does that mean, right? If he had the best of manners, how do we learn about his manners, right? We study him and then study those books written by scholars later on to highlight those manners in a more, how can I put it, detailed way. So there are genres like akhlaq, adab, literature, wisdom, poetry, let's say, okay? We have neglected all of that. We are so affected by Western philosophies, okay? We know all Western philosophers, thinkers, poets. Amazing, no problem. Read them. There is a time to read them as well. And there's a lot of wisdom they have shared. There is a lot of good in that as well. We as Muslims, we are not bigots, okay? We don't reject, we don't throw away the baby with the bathwater. We don't believe in that kind of stuff, right? In fact, the principle, al-hikmatu dhalatul mu'min, okay, that principle is very much an Islamic principle, that wisdom is the lost property of a believer. You take it from wherever you find it, right? So we study philosophers, thinkers from other civilizations, no problem. But before we do that, we need to study our own scholars, our own lost literature. It's not lost actually, it's there. It's lying, it's gathering dust, okay? It's lying around. We're not discovering it. We're not even aware of it, that it's there, right? So I'm talking about our poets. I'm talking about our thinkers, our intellectuals, okay? People who propose solutions to problems. We need thinkers today. We need thinkers today. I mean, we were having this conversation earlier that we have too many doctors, too many engineers, too many accountants, too many lawyers, because people are thinking of their stomachs. People are driven by their desire to...
The pragmatics.
Yeah, exactly, the pragmatics, or their desire to succeed in this life. And what is success to them? A good job, a good vehicle, a car, okay, and a good house, let's say, a big spacious house with a swimming pool in it, right? The question is, let's say you have achieved all of that, then what have you really achieved in life? Okay, what's so special? And the necessity for us, what do we need as humans? What do we need? We need a limited amount of food, a limited amount of clothing, a limited amount of space to live in, right? All of us, we can achieve that if we work hard enough. That's not the end. That's not the purpose of our lives. The purpose of our lives is to make this world a better place, okay, by worshipping Allah, right? So I believe Muslims are the only hope left for humanity, right? Because all other systems have been tried, tested, they are failing. Okay, if material success was to bring happiness, Sweden would have been the happiest country in the world. Japanese people wouldn't be committing suicides in jungles, in forests. I mean, there is a suicide forest in Japan where people, people commit suicide. Then we have places like Norway. We have the Western civilization in general. I mean, look at the problems we find therein. So all of these problems are there because people feel empty. Their souls are empty. They're not connected to the Creator. They have lost the purpose of life, right? So all of this material success is not bringing happiness people are looking for.
I'm excited to ask you this question because, mashallah, tabarakallah, you're an expert in history. And so I want to ask you, out of your own almost tadabbur of Islamic history, what are some of the things that you pull out in terms of that are almost truths that are apparent if you kind of look at the whole thing as a whole, and that can benefit us in unlocking our own selves, our own path forward in our daily life today? One thing, or maybe I'll give you some time to think about it, is just to share one thing that I was just contemplating myself recently and just thinking that, subhanAllah, you look at human psychology and what we value, right? If I were to tell you that, this telescope actually went to the moon and back, would you value it more?
I don't know, it depends.
Neil Armstrong took this back there,
Yeah.
and it got moon
Because of
dusted
the
on
provenance,
there.
yes, absolutely.
And moon dusted on there and it came back.
Yes.
You'd value it more, right?
Yeah, absolutely. because
Okay,
of
if
the
I were to
provenance,
tell you that this telescope actually predates even the Prophet ﷺ, it's 10,000 years old, would you value it more?
Yes.
You'd value it more. So
Absolutely.
you're saying that the further distance it is and the older it is, the more you value it, correct?
That's right. Absolutely.
Now, the Quran, where did it come from? How far of a distance did it come from?
It came from Allah.
The furthest distance in
Yes.
terms of like the Lawh Mahfud, like something
That's
that
right.
we can't transpire or think about the distance.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
Or even use those terms. Right? And how old is it?
It is Allah's knowledge.
Lawh Mahfud, and it was
Yeah,
recorded
yeah,
in Lawh
yeah,
Mahfud, and
yeah,
it's
yeah.
beyond even our time scale or what we conceive of time.
Yeah.
So subhanAllah, in terms of value, if we even connect with what's in our fitrah, the thing that we should be valuing the most in our homes today, out of every object that we have, should be the Quran, just from a historical lens.
Absolutely.
And that's just
100%.
doing tadabbur, like you're
Yeah.
just thinking of it, thinking of it deeper. And so I was excited to hear some of your thoughts. I know it would be very difficult to condense and put some
Yeah,
of these
yeah.
things into, especially I'm putting you on the spot. But is there anything that you can kind of share with you, any reflections or anything that you think that would be very, they're almost like wonder moments,
Like epiphanies.
epiphanies,
From the history of Islam.
Yeah,
history
like
of
things that you're
or
just...
even you can do history in general, or like whatever you think would be kind of give us a more insight into understanding when you spend time doing this. And if the brothers and sisters and myself listening to this spend time learning about Islamic history, there is something there. There is a knowledge there that cannot be extracted from your daily life.
One of the lessons I have learned, one of the most powerful lessons I have learned from my study of history is that kindness never dies. An act of kindness will never perish. It will live. Whether humanity survives or not, that act will live on. People will remember it, and people will take lessons from it, and they will cherish it. They will celebrate it. I can give you some examples. For example, one of the greatest things we know about Sultan Salahuddin Ayyubi is that he recovered Al-Quds for the Muslims from the Crusaders, right? But very few people know him as a person, as a human being. They know him as a general, they know him as a king, they know his history, they know his legacy. Generally speaking, Muslims are aware of what he did. But what was he like as a human being? Okay, his acts of kindness are documented, and they will never be forgotten. That's why he was so special as a human being. For example, a Crusader woman came to him, requesting to find her daughter, because her daughter was kidnapped from the Crusader camp. She went to her people. Long story short, her people said, the Muslim king is a merciful man. Even they testified to the fact, and this is happening on the battlefield. When the lines are drawn, they are on the other side, and the Muslims are from the other side, right? And they are telling one of the women that he is a merciful man. Only he can help you. Okay, so she crosses the lines. From her side, she comes to the Muslim side, and then she wants to speak to the Sultan. She's brought in front of the Sultan. She speaks in a language which was possibly Latin or Old French, and the words were translated. And she tells the Sultan, crying, that my daughter was kidnapped from our camp, and I need to recover her. So Sultan sends his agents, having been moved emotionally. He cried. When he heard her appeal, he cried. And this is, by the way, reported by the Sultan's personal biographer. Bahauddin ibn Shaddad was also his sheikh. He wrote this biography, Al-Nawadir al-Sultaniyya, and in this book he documents this story. He's an eyewitness. So agents come back with the girl. Some time later, they found the girl in the slave market. She was being sold by the kidnappers. The girl was reunited with the mother. The mother fell on the floor, started throwing sand on her face out of happiness, and everyone was moved by that. Now, that act of kindness will live on until the Day of Judgment. Sultan Salahuddin al-Ayyubi was special, not because necessarily he conquered Al-Quds for the Muslims. Okay, there are many more generals in the history of Islam who did greater things, possibly. Not. I mean, I can't say anything.
And think about what that act of kindness did for that family.
Yes.
For the rest of their life. Maybe they passed that story down for generations, that you're alive today, or you're part of this family today because of a kindness that a man showed us how many years ago.
People told stories of Sultan Salahuddin al-Ayyubi in Europe when he was alive and after he had died. Salahuddin became a good Muslim or a good infidel in Europe. I mean, he couldn't be in paradise. He couldn't be fully acceptable for the Europeans because of the Catholic Church and the propaganda against Islam in Europe at the time. But he became a good infidel, known as a good infidel because of his chivalry, his principles. Likewise, we have another act of kindness. Umar bin Khattab radiallahu anh, walking the streets of Medina and patrolling and seeing whether people are in good condition. And there was a famine going on, and he found a woman with kids, and he helped the woman. When the woman saw him, he asked the woman, what is going on? And she said, my kids are hungry, and I will take Umar by the forelock on the Day of Judgment. Not knowing that she's actually speaking to Umar, the caliph, the ruler of the Muslims. And Umar said to her, how does Umar know what's going on with you? She said, he's our ruler. He should know our condition. Umar runs back to Medina, brings food on his own show. I mean, he had a servant with him. He didn't let him carry that because he said, it's my burden, I'll carry it on the Day of Judgment. So I carry it today. So he goes back, he cooks the food for children himself, to an extent that his servant reports, who is the reporter of this incident, that when he was blowing into the fire, smoke was emerging from his beard, radiallahu anh, and he cooked the food and gave it to the children. And then he waited for them to have their fill, and they started to play happily, and then he departed from the family. Before he departed from the family, the woman said, you should be our ruler, not Umar. And then he smiled and he said, when you see Umar, speak kindly with him. Don't be harsh. And didn't tell her that I am Umar bin Khattab, the famous Umar bin Khattab, the one you've been condemning so far. So these acts of kindness, I believe, are the cream of our civilization.
You know, that's your tadabbur. You know, the Orientalist has the opposite. The criticism of Salahuddin Ayyubi is that he was too tolerant. They literally say the only mistake of Salahuddin Ayyubi is that he is too tolerant, too kind, basically.
Yeah, he forgave, so then the Crusaders could keep coming back.
Karen Armstrong, Karen Armstrong, in her book The Holy War, which she has written on the Crusades, she states that he was merciful to a fault.
Yes.
He was, his mercy was one of his weaknesses, allegedly, according to some people. Absolutely.
They said that there would be...
because they didn't get the meta narrative. They didn't get the meta narrative.
Prisoners of war who were just fighting him
Yeah.
would ask for amnesty,
Yeah.
he would say, okay, but you need to take an oath that you're not going to battle anymore.
Yes.
They would take the oath, then they would go back, regroup and pike, and
They
come
would
back and
break
fight
it.
again.
They would constantly break it.
And the king did that himself. Guy de Lusignan,
Yeah.
the king of Jerusalem, who was caught in the Battle of Hittin in 1187.
Yes.
Sultan Salahuddin Ayyubi, let him go. He gave him respite and took an oath, but he came back to fight the Muslims and caused a lot of problems. So, exactly. But my extraction, let's say, of my tadabbur of the history is that acts of kindness will always live. And I am not extending this how can I put it?
Just to the dunya even.
No, just to the Muslim community.
Obviously,
These acts can be found in other people. Marcus Aurelius. Marcus Aurelius was a Roman emperor, a very moral man in many ways. Of course, he had other problems. He was a Stoic philosopher, okay, and he had some good principles, very Islamic principles, by the way, because those principles can be found within Islam. I mean, I believe anything moral achieved by any civilization or any philosopher or any thinker can be easily found in Islam, because Islam is from Allah. It's so comprehensive as a system. One human being cannot possibly come up with Islam or the Quran for that matter. I don't believe that's possible. Anyone who studies Islam and the Quran carefully with an open mind will come to realize that this book could not have been put together by one human being. It is impossible, right? Even a group of human beings, right? It is definitely divine because of the principles it imparts. So we find a collection of moral teachings, moral principles in Islam, in the prophetic tradition that was achieved possibly by other people in the past. So Marcus Aurelius was one of those people who had some very moral principles. For example, there was a rebellion against him and a list was presented to him. He didn't read the list. He ripped it apart and he threw it away in case he ends up killing an innocent person, in case he ends up punishing someone who doesn't deserve punishment, right? And he had this concept of marua. In Islam we call it courtesy. Like in the Arabic language we have this concept, marua, when out of courtesy you avoid certain people, you look basically you, how can I put it, you don't really punish them for something they have done because of some favors they might have done to you in the past, right? So Marcus Aurelius, his wife was cheating on him and he found out, and the advice was given to him that you should kill her. You're the emperor and she's your wife. She's not doing what she's supposed to be doing. And he said, no, her father was very kind to me. So for her father, I will let her go. So he had these principles, even though he was a Roman emperor. Romans were brutal, but he was an exception. Why he stands out from all the Roman emperors put together is because of his moral deeds, his certain moral principles.
So a secular historian looking at that might criticize that, might say that that's a weakness as a leader in terms of capitulating to your own moral ethics and so on and so forth, instead of doing what's pragmatically correct at the time and what's most pragmatically effective. And subhanAllah, it seems like when you're telling me this, it seems like you can actually extract the truths and the lessons from history. If you just even study history in general, if you have an Islamic lens on, then you'll know, okay, yeah, this was a good behavior.
Yes,
this is something that is praiseworthy. This is not something that's praiseworthy. And it helps you actually categorize things as, this is what we can take with us, this is something we can leave behind.
Absolutely. And we do justice with people and civilizations, and we praise achievements where they are moral, where they help humanity, where people have done great things in the past. I mean, I'm a huge fan of certain people. For example, one of those people is William Wilberforce. William Wilberforce was a British MP in the 18th century, and he fought very hard against slave trade. He was campaigning against Atlantic slave trade, which was very, very brutal, one of the worst types of slaveries in human history, and he fought very hard against.
It's almost like proof for the fitrah.
Yes.
Because you see this. Why would somebody have these inclinations, and why does it universally today, when we look back at it, like I'm not talking about these secular historians that are just going to look at pragmatics, but general people, they will always see that as a good thing.
Yeah.
General public, you go to cross culturally,
That's right.
cross nationally. It's something that connects us. This fitra that lets us recognize that it resonates with
Goodness,
us.
yeah.
Yeah, the truth resonates.
Hence my reading of history that an act of kindness will never die. People who have power, who have influence, will be forgotten because they weren't really anything special, right? But people who did the right thing, they were on the right side of history, they will be remembered, okay? And there are many examples of that, many examples of that. People who were on the right side of history, they survived, historically speaking. They are well known because of their acts of kindness, right? Others, many kings, many generals, many philosophers, many thinkers, many scientists, the list goes on and on. They have been forgotten. They are just basically academics' footnotes in the history of humanity. No one really cares.
We were
about
talking about your spark before.
Yeah.
What was the spark that made you love history and go into Islamic history? And
It was history itself, my ancestral history. I looked at my ancestors and the history. My father used to always tell me stories. This is why it's so important to talk to your children about your history. Talk to them about the success of the past. Talk to them about the great achievements of the past. Most importantly, moral values and adab and akhlaq, things
where
like
should
that.
our parents start from?
Sorry?
If tomorrow I'm listening to you right now, I'm a parent. For me, my kids are like 6, 4, like young. But I still try and get as much as I can.
Tell
even
stories.
from now.
Tell them stories of the Prophet.
Where would I start from? Where would I start?
Start from the Prophet ﷺ. Make one of the hadiths of the Prophet ﷺ the subject matter of the discussion on, let's say, dinner table or at breakfast. You're talking to them and just read a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ and explain. And the hadith has to be on moral issues. For example, an act of kindness. For example, smiling. Okay, removing harmful things from the road, helping orphans, not harming animals unnecessarily, okay, not overburdening animals, things like that. I mean, these moral teachings of the Prophet ﷺ, taking care of widows, orphans, and the list goes on and on and on, right? Feeding the poor, the needy, and the list goes on. I mean, moving on to the lives of the Sahaba, talking about the Imams and their struggles, what they went through. So generally introduce your children to your history.
Start with Seerah, though, you're saying.
Seerah, and moving forward from Seerah. Don't always stick to Seerah. I mean, sometimes people make mistakes that they always talk about the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ. We need to take snippets of
varieties. So then
exactly. Talk about Shah Waliullah, talk about Ibn Taymiyyah, talk about Imam Abu Hanifa, Imam Shafi'i, Sultan Salahuddin, Ottomans. Okay,
because children like novel, right? If you just keep it always seerah, then it's no longer novel anymore. But if seerah is 1 week seerah, 1 week this, 1 week that, back to seerah, then it's always new. It's always new.
Absolutely.
It's always something you can look towards. The second, and this is for both of you actually, I'm curious because I know Dr. Saeed's traveled the world too. If a parent is thinking, okay, I can teach them from books, but what's better than books is actually going there. So in terms of doing more like these historical trips you see around the world and things like that, what would be maybe top 3? Obviously we know Makkah, Medina, number 1, right? Anyone's going to get to that conclusion very quickly, even spiritually. But beyond Makkah, Medina, from the two of you, and from your own experience too, what would you say would be a good place to start with children, or even with youth, to take as a family? So thinking about it from just multiple perspectives, the general family, can they go there? How easy is it to travel there? What can they attain from that type of a trip? And why is it important to actually invest in doing historical trips?
Okay. I would say the top destination, if you happen to be in the UK, in Britain, is the British Museum. You find a lot of human history in that one place. So it will save you traveling to many different places to look at different civilizations. So the British Museum has brought together, and a lot of people condemn the British Museum for stealing from humanity. They haven't stolen. I believe they have protected and preserved this heritage. Otherwise it would have been in private collections lying around in the world, and it would have been vandalized and stolen.
Private collectors,
exactly.
No one would ever see it.
Now human beings can see it. People can go and actually take inspiration. So the British Museum, definitely one of the places. Turkey is another destination. There's a lot of
Turkey.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of Muslim history with Roman history,
Where
Greek
should they
history.
go in Turkey? Because even when I look at that, I see, where do you start? Where do you go?
In Turkey, Istanbul is very historically rich. You have Roman history, the Byzantine history, you have the Islamic history there, you have Ottoman monuments, you have, for example, Hagia Sophia, which is one of the oldest churches in the world, it was the largest standing structure in the world for over 1,000 years, right? It was built in 532 CE, and it was the largest indoor standing structure in the world until the Blue Mosque was built right next to it. Okay, so it is a fascinating monument to visit. It was built by Emperor Justinian in the 6th century, actually before the Prophet was born, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So that very building you see in Istanbul, standing to this day, was resurrected before the Prophet of Islam was born. Okay, so Turkey, and then the Topkapi Palace has many good historical objects. With caution, when you look at stuff belonging to the Sahaba and the Prophet ﷺ and other prophets, take it with a huge fist of salt, not a pinch of salt. Okay, with a fist of salt, because
some of them, I think we can understand they're like educated replicas, you know, to a certain degree.
It's very difficult to even call them replicas. Okay, let's say, I mean, the turban of Yusuf alayhi salam, or the bowl of Ibrahim alayhi salam, the staff of Moses. Come on, you know, you have to have isnad. We can't just attribute things. So apart from that, the Ottoman history is absolutely fascinating in that museum, right? Also, there are places like the Rumeli Castle, which was built by Sultan Muhammad al-Fatih in 4 months, from April to August. He built this castle very, very rapidly, and it's there. It's in Istanbul. You can actually see it. And this castle was built, or this fortress, small fortress, was built to subdue or eventually conquer Constantinople.
So Istanbul in Turkey. We talked about even Tipu Sultan in India. Do you think that's mostly people probably Indian origin are probably going to be visiting
or visit Mughal monuments in India and Pakistan. So we have Badshahi Mosque in Pakistan, in Lahore, a magnificent structure. We have some other monuments like the Rohtas Fort. It was built by Sher Shah Suri in Pakistan, not very far from the capital Islamabad, about an hour and a half drive. And there are other places in the Muslim world. I mean, there are many.
What do you think
places.
for Africa, for example? Because you've been to Africa.
North Africa.
Yeah, North Africa. Is there a particular place that you've heard of or you've been to?
Libya.
Okay.
Libya is absolutely filled with history, Roman history in particular. Actually, one of the best preserved Roman sites in the world after Rome itself is in Libya. Is the city of Leptis Magna. In Arabic, it's called Labda. I've been there. I've seen it. I don't know what happened to it after the war. Unfortunately, it might have been decimated. Syria is absolutely amazing. It's mind-blowing. Jordan, there is so much Muslim history. You know, in Jordan we have Petra. In Jordan we have, the city of Jerash, very close to Amman. In Syria we have the Umayyad Mosque, one of the oldest standing mosques in the world today. Okay, the original structure is still very much standing. You will still see Greek written on the walls. It was a Greek temple. And it was a temple of Jupiter, during the Roman period. So the building itself is Roman. It's from the Roman period. It's very old, right? So it was the temple of Jupiter. Then it became the church of Saint John. And afterwards, after the Umayyads took it, it became the Umayyad Mosque, right? And that itself has a huge history, which I cannot possibly tell you.
So instead of just collecting and saving money to take the family to Hawaii, try and maybe
I would strongly recommend that do these kind of trips. Your children will be fascinated. They will be inspired.
Will they
for
be
life.
more? Do you think they'll be more happier going to Hawaii though, or do you think they'll be more happier doing these Islamic?
I wouldn't deprive children of Hawaii or a trip to Hawaii. But at the same time, if you want to take them to Hawaii,
but what about long-term happiness?
I would say, I mean, if you teach them history, it's going to help them in life, and they will take inspiration, and their identity, their attachment to Islam and the Muslim civilization will be strengthened, and they will feel as if they are part of a greater purpose. They are part of a greater family, a greater heritage, a greater legacy, right? And you will feel proud of it. Your children will teach their children. So it is an unbroken cycle. That's one thing. Also, I would like to advise the Muslims living in the West, in particular Canada, Australia, in the US, to build Islamic museums. Even if they, I mean, we have thousands of mosques. Each mosque easily costs somewhere around $2-3 million, right? Spend that money and build a museum also where you put Islamic heritage items, objects from the Muslim world, Quran manuscripts, Hadith manuscripts, handwritten manuscripts, centuries old, coins from the Muslim civilization like Umayyad coins, Abbasid coins.
You're touching on my last question.
Yeah.
This is my last question, is that we talked about, creating an environment at home where, children and yourself especially, sometimes it's good to use children because it motivates us to do things that we won't even do for ourselves.
Yeah.
So learning about history to teach your children, sometimes you think you're benefiting them, but you're actually benefiting yourself the more, right?
Yeah.
So it's good that we talked about this and starting that as a practice, because that can unlock meaning and that can unlock that psycho-spiritual state where we think, why are we not getting khushu in certain things in learning or in our salah or in our history? Maybe it's because we haven't invested time into that, right? We haven't tapped into that treasure that's waiting for us. So getting into those, weekly maybe things of learning something and keeping it novel is very important for ourselves and our children.
Yes.
Then we talked about, going on, maybe investing on some of these trips. And it doesn't have to be across the world. You just said the British Museum. There's museums here too in Canada that people can go to start just unlocking some of these lessons that we can learn and unlocking kind of the spiritual state we should have when we look back and see, okay, where was the real success in this situation? And even kindness and seeing these, qualities in people being ways of us unlocking, ways of seeing, okay, kindness, we always tell people to be kind, but actually seeing the impact and it living throughout history that till today in, Edmonton, we're talking about Salahuddin Ayyubi's kindness. That in and of itself should be a sign of showing us that this is such an amazing characteristic.
And I believe the Muslim civilization as a phenomenon itself was an act of kindness. It was a manifestation of Allah's promise in the Quran, وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَاكَ إِلَّا رَحْمَةً لِلْعَالَمِينَ. O Muhammad, we sent you not except as a mercy for the worlds. And the Islamic civilization was one of the manifestations of that very promise of Allah. Allah made this civilization happen, and through this civilization the world took a lot of benefit. Okay, Muslim civilization directly impacted the making of the Western civilization. There is no Western civilization without the Muslim civilization, and that's another discussion.
So we said the exotic trips to these,
and also I would like to advise Muslims to start protecting, preserving their history by collecting it.
This is my third question.
Yeah,
this is my third. So I'm working there. That we've kind of gone through this narrative of learning, through books and things like that, learning through visiting. The third question is exactly what you touched upon. MashaAllah, it just shows that we're both on the same road of thought right now. It's to understand, like we were talking about before, with an Islamic perspective, objects have a new life.
Yes.
Right? So like, for example, with an Islamic perspective, I have a sajjada, but if that sajjada belonged to my grandfather, and I even just know that my grandfather made sajda on that sajjada, I'll have more khushu because I now know I'm connected to a tradition of worshipping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That every time the family of this, tribe, touched the ground with their forehead, they kept that special. They made that a special moment that they preserved, right?
Absolutely.
So objects, right? A lot of people think, okay, materialism and things like that in a negative light. This is actually now breathing life back into materialism in a way that it's never been seen before, in the sense that you're giving it that connection to Islam. And now every time you see, for example, that coin you have, we were talking about this before, you touch that coin, you feel that maybe the Sahaba touch the same coin, that can lift up your iman.
That's right.
I mean, if you touch that coin and you have that connection,
or the person striking the coin,
yes,
let's say in the city of Wasit or in the city of Damascus, must have seen the Sahaba walking around.
Yes. And now think about this. You touch that coin.
Yeah.
Do you think your next thought is going to be a sin?
No.
Your next thought is probably going to be, you know what, the Sahaba, what we're great about the Sahaba, connection to Quran. Let me read some Quran.
Absolutely.
Right? So having these at home, having these objects, having some sort of connection can be a good reminder.
Yes.
With the right perspective.
And I advise all Muslim parents to encourage their children to start collecting Islamic objects. Okay? Whatever is affordable to people. I mean, there are some people richer than others. They have more financial ability. So buy Islamic coins. They are easily available online. They are sold on eBay. Right? Buy Islamic manuscripts. Get involved. Okay, I can give you examples of other people from other civilizations. They don't leave anything from the history. If they get
clubs where we celebrate
book reading clubs,
yes.
manuscript reading clubs, right? Do seminars on manuscripts. Let's say we have a manuscript. What is it about? Who wrote it? When was it written? What was the purpose of writing it? What script was used? What paper is used? What type of ink is used? Okay, how was it burnt? Why is it damaged? Why does it have worm damage? All of these things are absolutely mind-blowing. Why are we so reluctant to study our history? Why are we so blind to it? Okay,
Do you
why
have some exciting stories of tracking down Islamic objects?
Yes.
Because someone told me that
I have Indiana Jones stories.
I heard that. I heard you were like Indiana Adnan Jones.
Yeah, literally, I have a different kind of hat. It's that Pashtun parkour, you see? So I put that hat on and I go hunting for manuscripts and coins and stuff like that.
So do you have any exciting...
amazing stories, amazing, absolutely mind-blowing stories.
Yeah.
Like once I found a manuscript on a pile of... there was a bookseller, and I asked him, "Do you have any old books?" And he put a pile in front of me, right? I found this manuscript, a complete manuscript, basically falling apart. It wasn't one block anymore. Pages were all mixed up, so it was tied with a thread. So I looked at it, and it was a very important manuscript. It was written in the 19th century. It is the poetry of Sheikh Sadi, very famous Persian intellectual par excellence, who had written two texts in Persian titled Gulistan and Bostan. This is wisdom poetry. These are hikayat. Hikayat means a story. He's telling stories with morals at the end. So to teach. So all youngsters, most youngsters in the Indian subcontinent and in Persia would go through these texts to become moral people, right? Gulistan and Bostan. So I found the manuscript of Bostan, one of the books, and it was patronized by a governor working for Maharaja Ranjit Singh. So this is a Hindu governor. His name is Diwan Daulat Singh. He was the governor of the current territory in Pakistan called the Dera Jat, working for Maharaja Ranjit Singh, who was ruling from Lahore. Being a Hindu, he wanted someone to transcribe this manuscript for him, to take inspiration from some of these Islamic works. So as a Hindu, he had paid a scribe from Lahore, Muhammad Atta his name was, and I found all these details in the manuscript. Wow. And I bought it for like 1,000 rupees, which is like, how many dollars is that? Maybe $10 or less than $10, 10 Canadian dollars. I have stories like that. And as far as I was concerned, Allah sent me there to pick it up, to preserve it. Okay, it's still part of the Muslim history. It shows how Hindus and Sikhs were inspired by Muslim works, authored in Persia and later on disseminated within India. This is one of the stories. I have other stories where I found coins, Islamic coins, and managed to preserve them for posterity. So I see my life. If I was to say that, if I have achieved something in my life that I can say I'm happy with, it's my library, and it's my collection of such objects. So I have many important manuscripts in my library. We have inherited a lot of them from our ancestors. Some others I bought from auctions in London and in different places. So
inshallah, we're going to have to do a part 2 of the podcast where we go through your collection.
Yeah, and each and every single object has a history behind it that will fascinate people.
We need to do that, inshallah.
Yeah, absolutely, definitely. I look forward to that, inshallah. Another very quick story I want to tell is the acquisition of one of the earliest Islamic coins in history. Okay, the first properly Islamic coin was minted in 77, the year 77 Hijri, by Abdul Malik bin Marwan, who was an Umayyad caliph. And prior to that, the Muslims were using the Byzantine and the Persian model. They were using the Byzantine and the Persian currency with Islamic formulas transcribed on them, because for pragmatic reasons, they didn't change the economic status or economic conditions of the lands they conquered. So they kept the same currency Okay, because any new currency wouldn't be acceptable in the marketplaces.
Allows
Okay,
for
the economy would simply
continuancy,
collapse.
Yeah.
Right. So they kept the old currency, but 50 years later, after the Prophet ﷺ, they basically decided to reform coinage and start issuing properly Islamic or fully Islamic coinage. And Abdul Malik bin Marwan was one of the first people to do that. And the first coin ever minted in Islam, in the history of Islam, the first properly Islamic coin was minted in 77 with Islamic formulas transcribed on it. And I managed to buy the one after 77, which is the year 78. 77 is simply not affordable. That coin, that gold dinar, can easily cost you easily $500,000, $500,000 US. It has been sold in auctions, collectors buy that kind of stuff. The only affordable item in the line is the next year, which is 78,
Yes.
which is still comes in thousands of dollars. I managed to get it for a very reasonable price from a seller, and that's one of my gems. Okay, and how I acquired it is another story altogether. Let's leave that story for me. So I have many Indiana Jones type of stories. You know, we're going on a mission, protecting history and trying to save it.
Leaving on a helicopter.
Yeah, going in the
with a whip.
yeah, you find yourself in this like temple structure, and there's booby traps everywhere.
To solve a puzzle.
Yeah.
Ancient Mayan puzzle.
Yeah.
In a different way, my stories are very similar to that. Okay, because I don't only believe in teaching theory. I believe in field work. I believe in field work. Actually go and field history, find it, preserve it. There's nothing like it. I cannot describe the happiness I experience when I find a manuscript and I manage to preserve it. I have managed to basically, I mean, by the grace of Allah, purely by the blessings of Allah, I'm not even deserving of this honor, but I found manuscripts worm-eaten, completely falling apart, and neglected, and we managed to preserve them, repair them, get them rebound. And now if you look at those manuscripts, you think, subhanAllah, these are they'll probably survive for another few centuries, inshallah.
This brings us full circle, I guess, now, because now we're coming back to that aspect that you just talked about, happiness. And that, subhanAllah, we talked about identity and how history can help us reconnect and revitalize our identity and have a part of our identity that's strong, that can live on, that can go from generation to generation, developing stronger and stronger Muslims, but also one that can make us happier and happier. I mean, the more history we have to connect to, the more meaning we have behind the things that we have in our daily lives, the way we view things, and the more fulfilling those things can now go into the future. We talked about, how this can emancipate us from learning about history. Imagine this; it's so important. We think we sometimes lose the gems and jewels there because we're so fixated on what's right in front of us.
Yes.
Right. And so looking back, subhanAllah, we can learn about how we can emancipate ourselves and benefit our even daily lives. A lot of us, we're unhappy with things. Everyone's unhappy with something, in their daily lives. And really, I think from listening to you and Dr. Saeed in our conversation before, just simple, just take a little bit of time to just touch the past and you'll be surprised. And the joy I see on your face in your videos, and when you are talking about Islamic history or history in general too, when you're seeing it from an Islamic lens, it can be so powerful in your life.
Yes.
It can really change your life completely. Like you can go from a person who's not very happy on a daily basis, and just by touching the blessing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created for us, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala could have created us almost like ex nihilo, in the sense that okay, there's no history that we have.
Yes.
You just start. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created us with a history. We should really take that as benefit and touch that blessing that we have that grows with us, alhamdulillah. And then
starting with the creation of Adam alayhi salam, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala specifically let us know what that history was. We wouldn't have known.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
We talk about some very good things about implementing this on our daily lives, just weekly lessons, or not even lessons, just even 5 minutes, 10 minutes here or there, but just start something systematic that can grow with families and with yourself, even if you don't have children or you're not married. And then beyond that, investing. because anything you want to maximize value from, you need to invest in it.
That's right.
Right? If I want to start working out, I can only get so far until I start buying equipment. Then I can go further, right? Or spending money on nutrition. And then the last thing was about, tapping into something that I think we've lost completely. And that is giving meaning back to the objects around us, searching for those objects that can remind us of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that can remind us of the Sahaba, our beautiful history, Islamic history, and remind us of lessons that we can learn. So even if you have a piece of history like this telescope, right, it can remind us of the blessings Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave us throughout history. Look, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave technology to people such a long time ago, and we have technology now. How has humanity showed thanks to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for years and years and centuries and millennia of technology and products that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave us the materials for, the brains for, the opportunity for, the environment for, and yet we don't even think about thinking for these things.
It's sad that the Muslim community is very negligent towards, generally speaking, is very negligent towards its history. I've said this many times that we were the most bookly people in the world, and now we have become the most bookless people. And that's why I admire the Jewish people and the Sikh people in particular very much, because they are very focused on preserving their history. The Jewish people are very focused on preserving their history. In fact, some of the Jewish collectors are protecting Muslim history. I mean, one of the greatest Islamic manuscript collections in the world is the Daud Khalili collection. Daud Khalili is an Iranian, he's from the Jewish background, he's Iranian, right? And he has done a huge favor to the Muslim community. We must thank him for that. Okay, putting aside all our prejudices and all the recent events that have been going on in the Middle East and all that, but if someone's done something virtuous, we have to praise it, right? Like Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam in the Battle of Uhud, one of the Jewish fighters came, Mukhayriq, and he fought in the battle and he died. And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said he is the best of the Jewish people, Mukhayriq, because he fulfilled his pledge, his ahad with the Prophet, the agreement the Jewish people had made with the Prophet ﷺ when he moved to the Medina, then that when we are attacked, we will defend ourselves collectively. The Jewish people and the Muslims will come together and protect both communities, right? Mukhayriq was one of the exceptions who came out to defend the Prophet ﷺ because of that agreement. And the Prophet said, so likewise, when we see virtue, we have to praise it. Daud Khalili has done a favor to the Muslim community. He has protected, he has collected all these Islamic manuscripts from around the world, and they are part of his collection. The Sikh people are protecting their history. I mean, there is, if I'm not mistaken, there's a museum in Vancouver where the Sikh people have collected their history, and also to be fair with the Muslim community in Australia, we have a museum called the Islamic Museum of Australia, and that really fascinated me. I was really inspired by that idea. I think on the final note, let's say, is that let's work towards something like that.
Yes.
To protect our history, to teach people, our youngsters, about it. We need to build institutions where it is done, whether it's done through objects, through tours and trips, or through, let's say, museums and visiting private collections. We have to now start looking at this. Otherwise, we are losing a generation.
Personal transformation, I've said this before, can happen through information and inspiration coming together. And alhamdulillah, we got that from you, Dr. Saeed, and this whole time you've been here with us. But what sometimes stops someone from initiating that transformation is a barrier. Usually they have a barrier. They need to tear that barrier down. Then that information and inspiration can launch them forward.
Absolutely.
So as a concluding thought, maybe from yourself, and then inshallah Dr. Saeed can conclude for us, is what, if you look at history today, people like to say, this is my history. This is the Pakistani Indian history. So for example, a Arab youth growing up today might not want to, or even be inclined to, learn about Pakistani history or Indian history, vice versa. Or African history is very neglected. Or Islamic history in Africa, or the Islamic history in China, right? Very neglected, because we almost take our biases into our own learning. So could you maybe give us, as a concluding point, inshallah, just some ways of breaking down that? Because I don't see that with you. You look into British history, you look into, you talk about Professor Arnold and his book about preaching Islam. So you're not I can see that. You're not biased. You'll touch everything. If you, inshallah, when you go to Africa soon, on your next trip, you're probably going to touch something there. So how can we, as the ummah, let go of this stuff and get more clarity and start this initial action of transformation, learning our history.
The more we preserve, the higher position we have in this scheme. We can speak with authority. For example, not only preserving and protecting our own history, but protecting the history of humanity. We can become the guardians, generally speaking, of human history, and in that we will definitely manage to preserve our own history. If we aim high, we will achieve high. If we aim low, naturally we will achieve low, because we will think low, right? We need to think high. We need to start thinking about human history as something that needs to be protected. And in my collection, I have pieces from British history. For example, I have some amazing stuff from belonging to the British heritage, right? I have some manuscripts, I have some old books, printed books, some rare items, okay, some coins, let's say. Okay, I don't think okay, this is not part of my civilization. No, it is part of my civilization. Okay, it is part of it is my duty. Exactly.
All Banu Adam.
Kullukum min Adam wa Adam min Turab. We are all the children of Adam, and this is a joint achievement. So once we start to look sympathetically towards other histories, which is thinking big, right? Naturally, we'll start to look more sympathetically towards our own history. Okay, so if we completely focus on our own history and neglect other histories, we might achieve little within our own history. But I believe if you want to eat an elephant, and you go looking for one, you'll definitely find a goat.
Back to the lake analogy, cast a wide net.
Yes, absolutely.
These little
exactly. Thank you. Very nicely put. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So we need to think bigger. We need to think big and play our role as the guardians of human well-being. Allah has given us that position. Allah has made us a mercy for the world. We are the manifestation of Allah's promise. We just need to understand that. We need to know that when Allah says the Prophet ﷺ was not sent except as a mercy for the world, how does that mercy manifest itself today? Through the Muslim Ummah, through the Muslim community. So we in Canada, in the US, in Australia, in Britain, in Germany, in France, wherever we are, despite all the hostility and Islamophobia, we have to keep going. We have to remain steadfast. We have to explain. We have to do dawah. We have to tell people about Islam, the Muslim civilization, and our sympathy for others. Okay, and how do we demonstrate that? By even start talking about other history. Okay, so it's very important for us to be involved in history. I believe it's one of the most neglected areas in the Muslim Ummah, and we need to start waking up to it.
So in conclusion,
wake up.
Yeah.
Brothers and sisters, wake up and start protecting, start educating yourselves about your own history and historical objects, and you will see a difference.
You can't, you can't learn everything, but everybody can learn something.
Exactly.
Right? And that something can change you forever.
That's right.
So, inshallah, with that, Dr. Saeed, if you want to...
in terms of the impediments, the narrowness comes from within the smallness within your own self, your own ego. And if we look at, for example, the statement of Rubay ibn Amr to Rostam, it's like, we're here to deliver you from the narrowness of this dunya, your way, your religion, to the vastness of Islam.
Yes.
Right? So Islam takes you to the vastness. Even with history, we don't restrict ourselves because a person is non-Muslim not to learn their history. We don't restrict ourselves, as the Shaykh mentioned before, that, wisdom, knowledge is a lost property of the believer. We don't restrict ourselves from harvesting that for our benefit, because for the Muslim, we are trying to derive benefit from everywhere. And we want to leave benefit behind. See, that's, again, the narrowness of a person who only thinks for themselves doesn't want to leave anything behind. And we want to leave treasures behind. We want to leave something that will benefit humanity. And preserving history is part of that.
That's right.
If you don't preserve it, you can't leave it behind.
Yes, that's a good point.
And then that continues on the chain of history, and then maybe we can actually learn those lessons. And we are depriving ourselves with that narrowness. Nowadays, for example, you see this online, and I've seen conversations in real life where, for example, people will talk about how we should parent our children. new parents books, right? How to raise your children. What's the most effective way? How do you potty train kids? How should you feed kids? Every little thing, like this PhD, this. And they're lost. I see new parents all the time in my practice. We're so lost. We don't know what to do. And I said to them, what advice did you get from your parents and your grandparents on how to parent? So I really didn't talk to them about it. Actually, it's the opposite. I don't want my parents to tell me how to raise my kids. Nowadays it's... But subhanAllah, that tradition, that's just a micro example of how just historically within your own family, you cut yourself off and you reap the consequences. Because you ask your own parent, okay, give me some tips. You ask your grandparents, give me some, your uncles and your aunties. That's historical preservation. Because they might be able to tell you things that a book will never be able to tell you. In our family, we're susceptible to this. That's why we feed our children this. You know what I mean? Our family, this is how, we go to sleep. We're sensitive to light, or you know what I mean? There's all this nuance, or as you termed it, meta-narrative, that we don't get. We deprived ourselves because even from our own familial historical concept, we left behind. Oh, did you know that you came? Imagine how you said you get like meaning and things. Did you know you came from like a history that is so noble? Like this is what your forefather achieved.
Yes.
Your grandparents achieved. And then would that not inspire you if generations ago they achieved this? Then why can't I do something? Why can't I be a carrier of this ilm, this knowledge, this courage, these values, right? Why can't I continue to carry that, right?
That's very powerful. It showcases another barrier, is our ego to learning history.
Yes.
Because we think history started with us. My history, I'm the be-all, end-all. I already know everything I need to know. Why do I need to learn history? I know everything already. I have these degrees, I have this knowledge, I have these experiences. What am I going to get from history? It's an ego problem too. This lack of tapping into our history. And I think it's a humbling process, because the more you learn about history, it humbles you. Because you learn about the most greatest, smartest, powerful people.
The world didn't start with your existence.
Yes.
Subhanallah.
And history itself is a creation of Allah.
That's right.
History itself.
Yes.
It's not just the things in history.
Yes.
History itself is a creation of Allah.
It's one of the most powerful arguments in the Quran. 30% of the Quran is history.
Yes.
30% of the final message to humanity from the Creator is history.
Yes.
So how can we possibly neglect it?
SubhanAllah, I'm just reminding now of the ayah in the Quran. It says they forgot Allah, so Allah caused them to forget themselves.
Absolutely.
And we have done that. We have lost our identity by forgetting about Islamic history.
That's right.
The creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us the blessings in history that we have, that we can learn from and we can develop ourselves from. SubhanAllah.
So, Jazakallah khair to our viewers. A pretty intense discussion.
Absolutely.
In the history, meaning of life, our future, our children. All of these things are hanging in the balance, and we can only move forward towards light if we do it in the proper manner, the way that we have been guided to. So I'm just going to say we have a tagline for our outro. I'm going to say it, but then I'm going to give you, inshallah, I'm going to request from you, Sheikh, if you can basically give us our outro tagline. Essentially, at the end of every podcast, we say, we live by the haqq, we die by the haqq, and just when you think life is stuck, tune into Life Haqq.
Okay.
So,
we live by the haqq, we die by the haqq, and just as life...
Just when you think life is stuck...
Just when you think life is stuck, we...
Tune into Life Haqq.
We tune into Life Haqq.
We
tune into Life. I've just destroyed it.
Yeah. Take two. Right?
We live by the haqq, we die by the haqq, and when we...
just when you think
the life is stuck, we tune into Life Haqq.
Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum everyone, Adnan Rashid here. I just want to request that every single one of you must subscribe to Life Haqq podcast YouTube channel. A lot of amazing content is going to come up. A series on Ottomans is already there. So watch this space and subscribe. Do not miss this opportunity to be exposed to amazing content on Islamic intellectual history and the history of Islamic dynasties and all of that. So Life Haq is your channel. Subscribe. Assalamu alaikum.